Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. I hope wherever you are in the world that you having a good weekend, a happy weekend. I've definitely had an unusually enjoyable day with some friends, just kicking a soccer ball around and walking around with my dog and their dogs, and just an unusually and incredibly beautiful midwinter's day. Just icy cold this morning, and then just bright and slightly warm in the middle of the day, but so bright and blue and sunny, and just really nice to be out there. So I hope you also had a good day. Today I'm announcing a brand new series. It is under the hashtag 2 years ago today CW for Chris Watts, and we're going to review the chronology of the phone data review in real time. And what that means is exactly 2 years ago, between June, July and August, we're going to go through all the texts as they happened, and you'll see how valuable that is when you go through it chronologically. I did do it on Crime Rocket 2 starting on I think from July 4th, but we're going to go a little bit further in terms of now, and we a little bit behind already. We are one day later than the emails that sort of started it all. And we're going to deal with that in this particular episode. So if you're interested in that, please subscribe. In terms of Patreon, the Watts Tapes episode 5 is already up. Coming soon on Patreon, is not up yet, but Two Pollyannas, the third book in the 9-part Two-Face series. That's obviously already out on Kindle, but the audiobook will be coming soon on the $5 tier, along with all the other audiobooks on Patreon, so check that out. Okay, and so let's get started. So on June 12th, there was a series of emails between Chris Watts and Nicole Kessinger, all sent from work emails, and it is interesting that this is the moment. It was actually one day ago. It would have been 2 years ago to the day, but it was around about mid-June that it feels like things started to gain momentum between Watts and Kessinger. Now, people talk a lot about that Kessinger was stalking Watts, or that she'd Googled him, months earlier and whatnot. People seem to like speculating about stuff that they don't know, where there's not a clear answer. They want to sort of speculate endlessly on, could this be the case or could that be the case? And it makes more sense to pay attention to what we do know. And what we do know is there are these emails from June 12th where she writes to him, he writes to her, and they both make their intentions very clear to one another. So, are you telling me that they that these emails are false or manufactured, or that they knew someone was listening and so it's not true? Obviously not. So these emails are giving us the best indication of what was actually going on and what was starting up in June with Chris Watts and his co-worker Kessinger. Now, what's quite amazing is Scott Reich dealt with these emails in quite a sort of a brief video. It's only about 26 minutes long, just dealing with these emails, and it's got over 850,000 views. Quite incredible, isn't it? And so I think these emails are a good place to start off with this 2 years ago today Chris Watts series. And in fact, it actually starts about a week earlier with other emails, just kind of like a general work email from Kissinger, and then a response from Chris Watts just saying have a good day. But it's on June 12th at about 10:55 that you kind of get there's like a turning point. There's a definite moment between Watts and Kissinger. And it starts off with her saying something quite deep. She says, "Thank you for being honest with me this morning. Truthfulness is so underrated in our culture." It's such a ironic statement to make given everything we know about the Watts case. I mean, the Watts case is a carnival of lies, isn't it? I don't believe Chris Watts has ever told the truth about what happened, and I think his confessions are just small little snippets of truth in them, but he just seems to be incapable of telling the truth, and that is why it's so sad that we haven't seen a court case. Of course, from Kissinger's side, I don't think we've gotten the full story either, so it's just really an interesting and supremely ironic comment to make in the sort of opening email, this one, where she says, "Thanks for being honest," because what they were about to embark on would be maybe being honest with one another. I don't really think so. I certainly don't think he was that honest with Kissinger. But also being, if not dishonest with others about the affair, well then cagey and deceitful. When you have an affair, you're not being honest. So it's just an ironic comment that she makes. And then Chris Watts responds, if her email is 2 sentences long, basically one line, his is 1, 2, 3 sentences long and just over 2 lines. And that's how this is developing, sentence by sentence, step by step, very gradually. But it will soon sort of spiral, I guess, out of control. And Watts answers Nikki saying, "I'm a straightforward guy. Lying just complicates things. I think you're absolutely stunning, and from what I've learned about you so far, you seem like an amazing person. I hope to continue to get to know you better since we have a lot in common." And he signs off Chris Watts. Now, what I think is important to bear in mind here is, although this email from June 12th is like a milestone, it's like a major marker, it's referring to the fact that they know about one another through previous interactions. I don't think Chris Watts is saying to her out of the blue on this day, "I think you're absolutely stunning." And when he says, "From what I've heard about you so far," I don't think he's heard things about her that day. I think he's known about her for some time. She's been on his radar for some time, and he's sort of noticed her and developed an awareness about her, and probably developed feelings about her. And then when he says, "I hope to continue to get to know you," that sounds as like he's already gotten to know her quite well. And when he says, "We have a lot in common," well, how does he know? Well, because they've obviously had quite a few conversations already, right? So obviously these emails are kind of a signpost to something that has happened in the real world that has prompted this. And it's unfortunate that their interrogators, being Kobach and Coda, didn't sort of ask Watts and Kissinger, what led to these emails? What are you talking about here? What sort of prompted, what was he being honest about? And so on and so on. And maybe at this point he was telling her that actually he's married. That sounds like what it is likely to be about, doesn't it? But what do you think about Chris Watts telling Kissinger, "I'm a straightforward guy," and where he says lying just complicates things? Because this is a case that's Exhibit A in complicating things by someone lying. The Chris Watts case isn't that complicated a case. If you want a complicated case, look at Laurie Vallow. That's a complicated case. The Chris Watts case isn't that complicated, but what makes it complicated is giving all these different versions of something. When it's not necessary, he's been found guilty, he's in jail. Obviously, he feels like he's got some reputation to protect. He wants people to think well of him, even despite what he's done. He wants to give a version that's more acceptable compared to the version that's actually what happened. It's interesting that Watts also says, I think you're stunning, and from what I've heard about you, you seem like an amazing person. So from who has he heard? What is it from who has he heard what kind of person she is? And isn't that his work colleagues? Wouldn't his work colleagues have said she's this kind of person or whatever it is? I mean, who is giving him this information? Who else could it be? Okay, and that then brings us to the two fairly lengthy emails that take place in the afternoon. The one is from Kissinger at just after 2:30 on the afternoon of June 12th. And then Chris Watts responds to her just under 2 hours later at 4:21. I'm just going to go through both these emails briefly. Kissinger is now responding to Watts, telling her she's an amazing person and that I hope we can get to know each other better, and that he's a straightforward guy. And he says to her, she says to him, Chris, agreed. It's always nice to find people you can relate to. I enjoy talking to you as well. I feel understood. I don't think there's anything, I don't think she's manipulating him or saying something that's not true there. I think she did feel understood with him. I think he did want to listen to her. I think he did, because he's infatuated with her at this point, maybe even more. He wants to listen to her. He wants to understand her. He wants to impress her as well. And obviously, if they have certain things in common, like engines and cars and machines, then it's quite easy for them to get along in that respect. And this is the part that I think is something that many people have noticed, is where she says, she just sort of volunteers it in this email. She says, I'm looking for someone to build a beautiful life with, right? Now, how on earth can you say something like that to a married man, given what then happened? They then embarked on like a 6-week affair, basically at this point, right? You could argue that the 6 weeks kicked off closer to July, that it was the entire month of July and the 2 weeks of August. But it kind of was, kicking off here, where she's saying, this is what I'm looking for, obviously in a man, and she doesn't want to just have a good experience with someone. She's trying to build a beautiful life with another person. And isn't that what prompted Watts to commit murder ultimately? Is that he also wanted to build a beautiful life with her. He wanted to literally do exactly what's happening here. He was looking, it was almost like she's saying, I'm looking for someone to build a beautiful life with, and Watts was saying, I'm that someone, you can build it with me. Let me just get rid of my family and then we can do that. Not her asking him to do that, but him saying almost to himself, I'm going to make myself available. I'm going to make myself the best candidate for you to do that, to get what you want, because I also want you. And she goes on to say, it seems so simple to do that, to build a beautiful life with someone, but it's so unrealistic sometimes. And I think Watts can completely sympathize with that. I think he completely feels where she's coming from with that, because he probably also wanted I wouldn't say a beautiful life, but he wanted a different life to the one that is leading. and that has seemed unrealistic to him. Is, how can I escape from this? How can I don't want this life, I don't want this house, I no longer want this. But whenever he thinks that, he must also be thinking, well, that's kind of unrealistic. How can I leave it behind? What would that look like? And then she says, build something similar to what you have done with your wife and those cute little girls. Now, bear in mind, in this email thread, she's just earlier said, thank you for being honest with me. Well, and now she's talking about, I want something like what you have with your wife and those cute little girls. So it seems like he's shown her pictures of his family, right? And said, well, look, I'm married. This is here's my wife. Here are my children. Keshan just seen that and felt very envious and said, and sort of thought, I want this. I want what you have. I want a beautiful life like what you have. And of course, the photos of the Watts family flatter to deceive because it looks picture perfect. I think it's unlikely the Watts case would be so high profile if they didn't have professional photographers taking photos of them and portraying them looking so perfect and so perfectly happy. And I think the professional photographer aspect also applies to, for example, the John Benet Ramsey case. I think if there were no professionally executed photos of John Benet, this cute little girl, but now sort of wearing makeup and looking totally different from the little girl that went to school. The fact that you've got these professional photos of her all dolled up, like with her hair done and everything, looking gorgeous, but also totally fake in a way. I mean, that's not how John Benet looked when she was running around. And, there are some really compelling photos of John Benet where she's like wearing a crown and I think she's got makeup on and so on. She looks totally different. But it's because of those photos that I think that John Benet Ramsey became a world famous case. Because people noticed that little child because of the dressing up, the dolling up of this child. And I think something like that is happening with the Watts family, where because of this effort to promote the family on social media to sell Thrive, because of this effort to present this family as a fairy tale for the MLM folk, everyone was actually kind of duped in the beginning, thinking, wow, what a nice bunch of people, beautiful children, beautiful wife, beautiful husband. What the hell could have gone wrong here? Everything looks so fine. How could something go so horribly, horribly wrong, right? And that is the same thing you have with the John Benet Ramsey case as with the Chris Watts case, is you have this incredible fairy tale that then gets snuffed out into something approximating a horror movie. Like, what is more of a nightmare, a dark nightmare, than children being thrown into oil tanks and what happened to Shanann? The same with John Benet. What is more of a nightmare of this little child that seems so beautiful and innocent, dying in such a horrible way, where her head is cracked open, she's badly garroted, and there's even a sexual aspect to it, right? And then there's this horrible ransom note. It just there's this incredible mismatch between the fairy tale and the nightmare, isn't there? And that is what people find so compelling. They're kind of saying, how can this happen? And so we have the moment that this is sort of, that these events are triggered into action, where Kessinger's saying, I want what you have. I want a beautiful life like you have. But it just seems so unrealistic. And then she says, I do believe in karma, so out of respect for myself, you and your family, I think it's best if we keep that friendship at work. So they've already established in conversations offline, not through email. We don't know how much was going on through text and so on, but they've sort of already established something is going on between them, where Kessinger is prompted to say, I'm looking to build a beautiful life, but you know what, out of respect for myself and you and your family, let's keep our friendship at work. Friendship being kind of a euphemism for something's developing between us. There's a feeling of attraction, there's a feeling of having things in common, and there's also ... There's also maybe something more. And again, this is supremely ironic because she's saying, I believe in karma, and so out of respect for myself, you and your family, let's keep this under control. And I mean, look at what happened to the karma. Look at the way that things developed, because ultimately, well, can one say that Kissinger had respect for Watts's family, given what ultimately happened? I mean, she was actively involved with an affair with him when Shanann was out of town. At this point, she wasn't. At this point, she was home. But later, when Shanann wasn't around, did Kissinger have respect for his family? When Chris Watts was in North Carolina, did Kissinger have respect for his family then? He's now with his wife, with his children. It's an open question. Do you think that kind of thing is having respect? Right? And she then ends off that email with a kind of cryptic comment saying, by the way, I keep the conversations we have between us. Which is, she's kind of saying, well, look, let's keep things respectable, but by the way, I'm keeping what's going on between us, which is almost as if she's saying, I want to have things, I want to behave the right way, but I'm also going to be discreet about us. That seems to be opening the door a little bit to something, doesn't it? Don't you think? To say, well, by the way, despite what I've just said, I'm going to keep what happens between us in terms of conversations, I'm going to keep that discreet. Isn't that saying, well, something, isn't it? And then almost 2 hours later, Chris Watts responds, now, I've got an idea, both of these emails, quite a lot of thought went into both of them from both of them. In other words, they probably maybe spent half an hour to an hour writing and editing and changing the email so that it read exactly the way they wanted it. So I think there was a lot of forethought before writing the email, and then also while they were writing it, and then also afterthought. Having written it, maybe I should change this, maybe I should take that out, whatever. Again, you can also see how if the number of words and sentences in Kissinger's first emails were on the little side, not a lot of words, not a lot of content, it's now gone to 4 or 5 lines. And the same with Chris Watts. He's now also saying quite a lot in his response. And there's kind of a mirror in the way that she writes Chris, comma, and then writes whatever she's saying. It's kind of I won't say matter of fact, but it's kind of a practical, okay, let's just get it out there. And even the almost the timbre, the pacing of the words, where she says, Chris, comma, agreed, full stop, it's always nice, is similar to the way he responds, where he says, Nikki, comma, yes, comma, beautiful life is something. It's got the same sort of, in other words, the response is, in a weird way, a mirror image of the other one. And what Chris Watts responds is, he says, yes, a beautiful life is something that is hard to find in this world, since people always seem to have an agenda for everything. And that is kind of a ironic statement from him as well. I think it's ironic because he wasn't in a beautiful life himself. It looked beautiful. The house looked beautiful. The wife and children and the family portraits looked beautiful, but was it a beautiful life? Not really. It was about to end in an as ugly way as is possible for a family to end. I mean, is it possible for a family to be wrecked or destroyed in a more horrible or nightmarish way than the Watts family was destroyed? And yeah, he's talking about a beautiful life is something that is hard to find in this world. And he's talking about people always have an agenda. What do you think that's in reference to? Because in a way, I think he has an agenda. In other words, Chris Watts has an agenda. He's obviously interested in Kissinger. I think Kissinger probably also has an agenda as well. She's interested in the life Watts has apparently gotten for himself, achieved, put together, assembled, whatever you want to put it. And then he might be also talking about Shanann and Thrive and MLM. All the agendas going on there is, how am I going to sell this powder? How am I going to present this? Maybe it's a bit of a snipe towards that. I'm not sure if it is, but could he be referring to an agenda towards someone that he is feeling less than positive towards? And think also about the agenda in terms of the pregnancy, in terms of having the third child was kind of maybe you could argue that it was meant, it was meant in a constructive way. It was meant in a positive way. It was meant to heal the Watts marriage. It was meant to bring them together. It was meant to stitch together this family that was starting to sort of tear apart just automatically. And so it was Watts' agenda. If we have a third child, maybe this will automatically or through the child, it will cause us to be, the fabric of our family to be restored or something like that. So, and if you just think of Watts when he was, post murders, he had an agenda. His agenda was he was trying to set up a life with somebody. Meanwhile, he was telling this bullshit story regarding what he'd done. So he had an agenda. He still seems to have an agenda. But it is quite a loaded term, don't you think? And it does make one wonder what he's specifically referring to or who. He goes on to say, I do believe in karma. So he's saying the same thing Kissinger's saying now. Aren't those ironic statements for both of these people to be saying? If you take the hypothesis and you say, let's say at this point they weren't in an affair yet. Can we agree that at this point they weren't actually involved in an affair and they're talking about karma? In other words, the karma's still hypothetical at this point. The karma hasn't happened yet. And both of them are aware of karma and now they're, even though both of them are aware of karma, they are both now about to take a step into a new reality towards one another, and that karma is going to be activated. And look what happened. Look how many lives were destroyed, even though they were apparently very aware of karma. It seems like they went into this with their eyes wide open, and the karma was 1,000,000 times worse, even, if that makes sense. In other words, I'm aware of karma, so I'm going to be very careful. And then what happens? The karma explodes. So being aware of something is no guarantee that you're going to avoid it. So I'm not quite sure. I mean, maybe if we knew about a conversation they'd had about karma, but the moment after saying, I believe in karma and I agree with that as well, the moment after saying that, he says, Any conversations we have will stay between us. No need to worry there. And then he gives her his work number. And so one wonders, did they have just an intimate conversation? Had something? Did they like hold one another's hand? Had anything happened before this point? I think there may have been chemistry brewing. I don't think much had happened beyond that. I don't know what you guys think. Do you give someone your number after there's been an encounter, or I think what everyone can agree on is at this moment sparks are starting to fly from both sides, and both of them are already starting to think of perhaps what they want to do and what is going to happen, and that karma is a reality, and that they need to be aware of that. And maybe that is why the relationship exploded in the way that it did, is that they both were sort of aware of what was happening, and they were like, okay, so we can both keep things under control. And I think Nikki could keep things under control in terms of she could handle the affair on its own terms, but Chris Watts absolutely couldn't. I think Chris Watts thought he could handle it, and then realized at the last moment, being in the last week or two, maybe a little bit longer, I have got to keep this relationship. I've got to keep this going. I'm desperate to not lose this, and I'm going to take this step. And the karma ultimately of this relationship, if you want to use that typology, went into the murders of his family. That was the karma. And it ultimately destroyed those 3 lives, and also destroyed his life and her life. All because Chris Watts couldn't control his karma, couldn't control his shit. Anyway, it goes on to say, sometimes email can be tricky with my spotty service out there. So he seems to be saying to her, let's stop emailing. He's already given his number, and he says sometimes email can be tricky. And then he says, I have an early morning meeting, and then I'm doing LOTO for a construction crew on various sites all day. So if I don't see you tomorrow, I hope you have an amazing day. That's how he kind of signs off. So it's almost like he's saying, here's my number, I'm probably not going to see you tomorrow. And that's kind of like saying, maybe you should call me, because you're not going to see me tomorrow. And maybe she did. And then who knows what happened on June 13th, which is today, which is the day after that day, which would have been Wednesday, 2 years ago today. Okay, and so before I sign off, let me just explain LOTO. The people familiar with the oil industry will probably know this. LOTO is a safety protocol. It stands for lockout, tag out. It's a safety procedure. And it's really just to do with servicing equipment and maintenance so that machines aren't going to hurt people. So the whole idea is to have a system where employees involved with machines, starting them up or whatever, have them in a state where they're not gonna be dangerous. Bear in mind with the oil industry, if things aren't properly secured, you can have explosions. So the whole purpose of lockout, tag out is to make sure that you're turning the engine, or you're switching the engine or the mechanism into a safe sort of default situation. If anyone wants to talk a little bit more about that, they can. But what is interesting is Kissinger's job was in the health and safety area as well. So one wonders whether she hadn't just given him training, and that is why they maybe had like a face-to-face encounter, and that just led to them chatting and then kind of noticing that they had things in common. And so the question at the end of this email thread is, so what happened next? What happened after this email? And we're going to answer that question on the 14th of June, which is tomorrow, in hashtag 2 years ago today CW for Chris Watts. If you find this episode interesting, also if you find the series interesting, please share on your social media and on Twitter, but please use the hashtag 2 and years ago today CW, and that'll just make it easier to find and follow up, especially if you say missed a episode. I don't know if you know, on Twitter you can actually search for information on Twitter, clicking on a hashtag, and then you just click on latest or top, and that is going to give you all the latest information on Twitter about a particular hashtag. And that's often how I find news, especially when there's a lot of news happening at the same time. So for those of you interested in the Madeleine McCann case, every time I want to make a video, there's more information that comes out. So I've just really been waiting for the McCann circus to sort of settle down, and that has sort of happened. I do want to do a reaction video on that. I'm not quite sure when I'm going to do it, but maybe tomorrow. Having said that, I'm also preparing a third narrative called Beach of Light, and that follows on Deep into Darkness and Deeper into Darkness. The whole idea with Beach of Light is to bring together the extraordinary events of the last 10 days and to just kind of explain it in a cohesive way. I don't think you can sort of do justice to this crazy story that is the Madeleine McCann case in a sort of in a video. I think you really need to link it to historical evidence and contextualize it properly, and that's why I don't want to just do a video. I will probably do a video, but what I really want to do is put it together in a narrative that is going to bring the story to the appropriate conclusion by addressing facts and fictions. So that's why I want to do it that way. Beach of Light is unlikely to be a very long book. It'll probably be a Kindlet, which is to say less than 25,000 words. So I'm going to try and bring that out in the next few days, but no promises. I'm not quite sure how long this is going to take. I also don't know if there's going to be any more information coming out, but there certainly has been a lot since June 3rd, in terms of the breakthrough in the case, in inverted commas. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the John Mark Carr confession, in inverted commas, with the John Benet Ramsey case, and we all know how fake and what a waste of time that was. For those interested in the 130 years ago today Van Gogh story, there are 3 letters that I need to deal with today, and that'll follow on from this video. So look out for that. If you haven't already, please subscribe, like, share, leave a comment, and take care wherever you are. And I'll see you guys next time.